You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Hey everyone, welcome to the NY Patriot Show. In this episode, I got my buddy Ron from Wicked Planet joining me today, and we are talking more about Brian Kohberger and the Idaho 4. And we got Vance on, who was with us in part 1, so it only makes sense for him to be here in part 2. We got the three of us again here to talk about just some of the stuff with the Idaho 4 killings, things that we didn't get into last time. Even some of the stuff that we talked about last time I think is interesting that has come up with the defense recently as well. So that is something I would like to kind of like reiterate. And just some other things we didn't get to, and some stuff that I wanted to just bring up when it came to occultism. Enough about that, and I am going to introduce Ron from the Wicked Planet. What is up, Ron? Let everybody know who you are in case they don't already, and where they can find your show.
Okay. Hey, thanks for having me back on for part 2 on this. And I got to say, we're probably going to do a part 3.
I was thinking that too, actually, when I saw his bullet points.
There's so much to this case, and it's ongoing, right? So we got to kind of stay up with it. But yeah, I'm Ron from New England from the Wicked Planet podcast. You can find me on Instagram at Ron from New England, on Twitter at Ron from NE, and you can find the Wicked Planet anywhere as you can find a podcast. We're there. So come and check us out.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ron. And I got all his links in the bottom as well. And JJ, what's going on, my man? You want to say what's up to everybody and let them know where they can find your stuff as well?
Absolutely. Nick, Ron, great to join you all again for this discussion. I appreciate the invite.
Of course.
JJ Vance, I host the Operation GCD podcast. That's Garbage Can Dude. My smart-ass way of saying that I live in a garbage can world. And like to introduce folks to the interwebs, to just the general thesis of that whole podcast. I just like to mash together some comedy and conspiracy theory and aim to offer a shenanigan-infused journey into whatever thought process I have on the subjects. So great to join you all again today, and welcome folks to listen to any of the shows I've done there, and looking forward to this one again today on the Idaho situation.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. For real. Yeah, and his links are in the bottom as well. I think all of our stuff is in there right now as we're live. So you can go check their stuff out now if you want, or you can wait until after the show. But, so one thing I did want to there's actually a few things I would like to touch on in this episode. But besides the stuff that the defense has mentioned, and believe it or not, I do find that whole thing you even told me about taking the whole gas pump was actually bizarre to me. You know, those are two things I definitely wanted to touch on. But I figured maybe just to get, like, the high weirdness and strangeness out of the way and then kind of just go into, like, the stuff with the case, I was going to bring up some of just the weird things that I found with the case numerically and occult-wise. I'll just spend a few minutes and just go through that real quick. Because I think I mentioned it a few times. I think I mentioned it with you guys and even other people that I've touched on this topic with. I have said I've done this shit and like I've just never pulled it up. So,
and if I may just interject real quick, I'm excited to hear some of those aspects of it because I do think there is potentially some occult aspects to this entire situation.
Yeah, there's just like weird things like with the numbers and just like with the names and stuff. I did find, people always do talk about 13, and when it came to this I series that I'm even dropping now, only part 1's out now, going into part 2 and 3, there is like a lot of things with like 1 and 3. Even with magic, like the 1 and the 3 is kind of like a big thing. So I did find it interesting that like even on November 30th, 1 dude and 3 chicks, November 13th, 1 dude and 3 chicks got killed. So you kind of have a double 13 right there. But that could be just, who knows.
It's an interesting analysis though. It's one, I look at stuff a lot from a factual basis, so I'm not always paying attention to these kind of aspects, and I am intrigued by them, so I like to hear about them.
This one isn't really so much a cult. It's just like, I probably should have brought this up at the end, but I just do find this weird. There was like 7 uncompleted phone calls that were made from the phone of Conclaves from her former longtime boyfriend, a fellow student, from 226 to 252. And then Mogan also called, or if I'm saying her name right, her former boyfriend 3 times with the similar results from 244 to 252. I just even find it weird that these 2 girls were getting phone calls and dealing with this dude up until the same time And then like now there's people dead, and like I'm sure they probably didn't even question this dude. It just seems very weird. Like, why was this one guy like dealing with 2 of the girls inside the house?
That's a good analysis. If I may add a couple notes.
Yeah,
on that,
go for it.
Bring some more data on that question you just asked. Yeah, so you're pronouncing Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez. It's spelled slightly different than it's pronounced with her last name, but Mogan, yeah, I believe that's pronounced correctly, Mogan. So yeah, they were actually seemingly there was surveillance footage from the local bar they were at that night, just prior to their returning home, where they were actually speaking with Kaylee Gonzalez's ex-boyfriend Jack. I don't recall the last. I believe it's his pronounced. I don't know the pronunciation of his name necessarily. I think it's Decor. It's Jack Decor, I believe is how it's pronounced. But yeah, so they clearly had some interactions, face to face. But the 2 girls were apparently calling him incessantly there just prior to the murders. And in fact, those time frames you just showed, that was the initial time frame that law enforcement had developed as the time of the murders, because that was when the last time their phones were used.
Oh. Okay.
Now that timeline was shifted later as a result of a number of other factors, but initially that was the initial timeline.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure you've probably heard of this. The security cameras near the home picked up the sound of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog barking numerous times, starting at 4:17. And there's a 17 in here, and I think there's going to be a couple other 17s. Just for me, from my experience, from how I see stuff, I do think 17 is very much kind of like very like beast-like, or almost may involve death in itself. And when it comes to magic, the Abramelin ritual, or any ritual that is kind of based on coming in contact with your holy guardian angel, which is like kind of like the serious shit with magic. Crowley said it supposedly about the Abramelin when he did it at Loch Ness. Other people have said it. Some reason you hear a dog barking. They call it a hellhound. You will swear that you hear like a dog barking at your door. Weird shit. So like even with this, it's like the 4:17, and like the 3rd sphere is silence. The 4th one, when it comes to magic, that's really when sound kicks in. So it's like, are we hearing a dog bark on the 4th sphere in 17? It's just weird.
That is weird, because if you think about it, just from a standpoint of being in the environment there, like why did people start hearing in the camera pick up the dog barking at 4:17? It almost implies that a door was open or a window was left open or something that caused the noise to start then, as a result of, that is the time frame of what that now law enforcement authorities claim is the murder timeline in around 4:17. But if it didn't start at 4:17, if the crime started 12 minutes earlier, roughly, or so, why did the dog only start barking then? It almost implies that a door was left open or something like that. And again, police later indicate both doors were left open, the back sliding glass door and the front door. Now, they later flip-flopped on that in later press conferences, a few weeks after the crimes, but the initial statements by law enforcement did in fact state that the front door was wide open. Neighbors had also reported this prior to the police response that day on November 13th, and that the sliding glass door was open. And again, maybe you guys have a different take and perspective on that kind of statement about the dog barking, but it almost seems like that seems to be a strong indicator when individuals may have departed that property and left a door open, maybe, or
entering or leaving, one of the two, right?
Yeah, you're right, exactly.
And then it does kind of fit part of the timeline when because their estimated timeline was between 4 and 4:25 that the murders actually happened, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so if they're coming in and the neighbors are saying at roughly 4:17, they're hearing whimpering and hearing the dog barking. Well, the whimpering could actually be the dog too.
That's right.
We don't know that. My question is, why wasn't the dog freaking out during this whole operation? Or did the dog just run and hide? We don't know. I don't know if it's a clue in the case or not. It's just interesting to bring up. Mm-hmm. And while we're on this real quick, and then NY, I'll let you get back to your gematria. I just had a question now when they said neighbors heard. So I discovered that there was a neighbor by the name of Anand Harsh that goes by Chef Dizzy, who, right after, like the next day or whatever, he was posting on Facebook that he, 3 girls were killed right next door to him. He didn't hear any screams. He didn't hear this. He didn't hear anything. And then he goes to get interviewed by somebody on the news. And he said, "Oh yeah, no, I heard screams and this and that." So he had contradicted himself, and he caught it because he went back on his Facebook post and he edited that post to take away that he didn't hear any screaming. Do we know anything about this Harsh guy?
I mean, you bring up some good points, and that is the storyline of a non-Harsh relative to these murders. I mean, not much outside of, he has done a couple podcast interviews I've seen, and kind of further elaborating on some of those points from his very lengthy tome he posted there on his social media, because I mean it was lengthy if I recall correctly. But he seems to me to be more of like just kind of a sociopathic type of character who wanted to get some attention, as opposed to any kind of actual possible suspect in the crimes. I know early on the interwebs were abound with pointing the finger at this guy, but it didn't seem to have much validity to me.
Yeah, so you think there's nothing to the neighbor then?
Yeah, I mean, based upon the available information, it seems unlikely.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up real quick and see what you guys thought.
But no, you bring up a good point, because there's another neighbor that came out recently after that fraternity president from one of the University of Idaho fraternities there had overdosed back in March and died. And was one of his fraternity brothers. He came out and did some interviews across some podcasts as well. And I got an opportunity to hear one of those. And he stated that he was never questioned by law enforcement, and he lives directly next door or directly in front and can see the murder house. So it makes you kind of wonder how much door knocking and investigations were conducted around the immediate vicinity and the immediate neighbors. And again, this guy's in the social circle with the murder victims. And the fraternity brother of the overdosed death fraternity president, I don't think he gave his actual name. Maybe only his first name. But what was interesting there was he actually validated some of the other statements of townsfolk that wasn't a known drug house, and he stated he had purchased drugs there before.
Mm-hmm.
Something I want to ask, maybe you guys know, you might have even brought it up in the last one, but I forgot. Have they ever actually interviewed this DoorDash dude, or whoever the DoorDash was?
I don't think I've seen, even reading the documents and the back and forth between the defense counsel of Brian Kohberger and the state and all this discovery business. There hasn't been a lot of focus on that from what the statements are being made, and I don't think the investigators in the state of Idaho have really divulged that information. I think they claim to have interviewed him, but there's no, and they claim to have ruled him out, but there's no, details to those claims, I suppose, is what I'm getting at.
Gotcha. No, I was just, if it's like the last person there before they were seen alive,
Right, and I'd love to know. They don't think they've released what kind of vehicle this individual was driving.
No, you don't know jack
shit
about this.
I think that's imperative, especially relative to Kohberger's counsel statements, because Kohberger's counsel is convinced that the law enforcement has no idea what vehicle they're seeing on camera, according to recent filings. That's what Kohberger's counsel's position is, and it seems to be valid based upon the available information. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest points is the DoorDash driver. Who was it? What kind of vehicle were they driving? Were they really investigated?
They have to know who the DoorDash driver was. They have to.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, because that's easy to
you just have to see who the hell's phone it went to that did the delivery.
Yeah. It's way easy to figure out who the actual DoorDash driver was, and if they have not questioned him, that's a serious dropping of somebody's ball right there.
Balls.
Yeah. No, Ron, that's a good point, and there's a lot of that dropping of balls along this investigation.
Oh, that was great. All right, I'll get back into this real quick, and then we'll go on to the other stuff. I don't know if this is anything, but I do know that, Utah was actually named after Ptah, which is the guy, like an Egyptian god of springs. Now, I don't know if Latah County has anything to do with that as well. I do know L.A. or Los Angeles can mean, fallen angels. So, who knows if this is even an occult play of Latah? Who knows where that comes from? But
so you're saying Idaho's named after?
No, Utah. Utah is named after Ptah.
Yeah, disregard Utah. Yeah. Utah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, we were talking Mormon country in Idaho. I mean, that was just as much as Utah was founded by the Mormons. So was Idaho. And in fact, there's a number of very wealthy and prominent, well, we'll call them prominent just for the sake of the word prominent, Mormon fundamentalist sects that have long been established within the state of Idaho, not just Utah. and the one I'm trying to think of off the top of my head,
That's interesting.
I can't think of. They own they have a vast interest in a number of different industries, including I mean, you name it. And they're worth probably $500 million. That one fundamentalist sect just upon their company holdings.
Wow, I wonder if they have. You know what I found out they're big into those pyramid scheme things, because they're actually legal in Utah. You can run a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, big time. In fact, the U.S. Congressman that was out of Utah a few years ago, Jason Shavitz, I think that's how he made a lot of his money, was through one of those pyramid. He's a Mormon. He made him a lot of his money through one of those multi-marketing schemes there as well. Yeah, I think when you're talking the occulto, and that's a good point you bring up with the ancient Egyptian namesake, because that is the Mormon. I grew up Mormon. The Mormon philosophies and theology is deeply rooted in ancient Egypt. And
thank you.
And on top of that, relative to Latah County, it's interesting you bring up that does sound very similar to that ancient Egyptian god, because the people who founded Latah County and founded the city of Moscow and the University of Idaho were all seemingly occultists. They had some astrotheological belief systems. They had a small club called the Pleiades Club, which seemed to be some connection with the Pleiades star constellations, I believe.
Yeah. Wow, I might have to look into that after this. Maybe that'll be in part 3. So this I want to show. I mean, obviously, since they died a few days earlier, I mean, they were going to have an autopsy eventually, obviously. But, I mean, again, now on November 17th, they did the autopsy. Then on May 17th, Latah County District announced that Kohberger was indicted by a grand jury on 5 charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. So you get like a 17 again.
Well, if we can just pause right there on that note, Nick, because I find that interesting. I'd like to get your and Ron's thoughts on that. Because so they arrest the man on December 30th, right? And he has a public arraignment hearing scheduled, well before the May 17th date where his indictment came down there for, I believe, June 12th, right? I believe it was June 12th. So, did they pick this date on the 17th? Is this possibly some sort of intentional date in which to do the indictment? Because it's strange to me and highly abnormal from a law enforcement perspective and a criminal justice perspective, which I have an education history in professionally, that they would wait 5 months, essentially almost 5 months to indict the man when they already have him arrested, right?
That's interesting.
And they've already have a public arraignment hearing scheduled, just a few weeks after this indictment. So it does draw into question, now that you point out all these 17s, was that date chosen intentionally, possibly? I
mean, even the first date of the 12/30, I mean, if you want to start playing with numbers, I mean, even that would give you the Fibonacci. You would get a 3 and then another 3 and a 6. I mean, you would start getting, like, if you started playing with those, you get 3, 6, 9, but that could be off. But yeah, I have to check these dates now. Maybe like even what was going on with the moon, or how many days between. That could all actually show stuff.
So what are your all's thoughts though on the arraignment situation? I'd like to hear that. If you guys have any specific thoughts to share, like, do you all view, just generally speaking, do you all view that as some sort of possibly conspiratorial or malfeasance on the part of law enforcement authorities that they would wait 5 months? Because I mean, it's tough for me not to look at it that way. No,
I definitely think, I mean, I think his whole thing, even with the waiting, and even the fact of like how they did that, they do that in grand jury or whatever, like that was even just like. Yep.
So that was the grand jury, and they came down with the indictment there and issued on the 17th there. Yep.
Yeah, I just found that whole thing was very, very weird.
I don't think it's unusual to take that long, to be honest with you. I mean, you're talking a multiple count capital murder case here, right? So in order for them to make sure that they can actually get charges to stick, they can hold him, without bail. Although, it's supposed to have time, it's supposed to be in a timely manner, right?
Exactly. That's, yeah.
But 5 months in a case like this, I don't think is really out of bounds. I mean, do I think it's too long? Yeah, it's too long, because if they had enough evidence to arrest him in the first place, they would have had enough to go ahead and arraign him. Like technically, he probably should have been arraigned in the next week or 2 after being arrested.
Right.
And then it can go to the next step after that. It gives them time to work around the charges and figure out exactly what charges they're actually going to go after him with, because you have to be tried on the actual charges. Sure. They can't just make charges up after you've been arraigned or especially indicted. Whatever charges are based to get those court proceedings done are the charges that they do have to stick with, unless of course there's some type of plea deal. And then they can play it down to lesser charges or whatever, which I don't see happening in this at all, because they're asking for the death penalty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not uniquely or expressly. It's not expressly incriminating that law enforcement would delay and everything else like that. It seems very incriminating and points to malfeasance from my perspective, because you have a public arraignment hearing scheduled already, and the state is now fighting tooth and nail to not release discovery to the defendant, to Kohberger's counsel. So, but yeah, you make a good point. And generally speaking, it's not necessarily expressly, an act of malfeasance there.
I just feel like I don't know if it's so much the time. I think more of how they did that. I thought was just kind of shady.
I agree. I mean, it's at least on its surface, even if it wasn't shady, it has the appearance of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, we can say that the whole thing is kind of shady. JJ, let's. I want you to go over a little bit of how the defense attorney, who's a public defender, I don't know if people knew that, it went after the prosecution in the court hearing with the judge and said, I'm not accusing them of doing anything wrong, but
no, you're right. She lambasted.
They're withholding discovery on this. Now, the prosecution has to give anything and everything that they have for evidence against a defendant, Kohberger in this case. They've got to give that information to the defense, because if they're withholding information and that gets discovered halfway through the trial that they've been withholding evidence, well, that's like an immediate mistrial.
Well, I mean, you're bringing up some excellent points, and I have some great responses for you, because they're already allegedly breached that whole process with the Brady violations that occurred back in March. So Brady violations are the withholding of exculpatory evidence from a defendant, and there's already been Brady. That's what I'm saying. There's already been some of that going on. I don't want to interrupt Nick's finishing up with some of the gematria stuff, but yeah, I would love to tackle those responses if Nick's done with the some of his occult aspects here.
Oh yeah,
he's ready to drop some G on us though, and I am intrigued by some of this stuff that he does. Whether it's some sort of metaphysical connection or intentional acts, it's strange that these things do pop up. I feel like.
Yeah, I've even said before, it could just be metaphysical stuff. Real quick, Brian Kohberger lived in G building. I don't have the gematria up for it, but I'll just let you know. People can check. He was in the G building, and then the house, the King's Road. First of all, even in magic, it's Yod Hey Vod Hey. That's a magical formula. It's king, queen, prince, and princess. I mean, kings are all over tarot cards. Crowns are everywhere. I mean, kings are used in occultism. So I find it weird that he was in G building, and then you have an address of 11 and 22, which could add up to 33 Kings Road. And then the thing that I want to just, it's almost like, it's just turning into the fucking OJ case. This sheath that they're going on about, this fucking sheath that is like the nail in the coffin. It's a Kabar sheath. You type in Kabar into gematria thing, and it equals 33.
Interesting.
I'm like, even this sheath they're going on about equals 33. Real quick, I just ran their names, and then I'm going to say this real quick, and then I'm done. Madison Mogan.
No, I like it, Nick. I like it. That's good stuff.
Madison Mogan. Some of the matches: Fox, Adrenochrome, Lord Amun Ra, Hollywood, Butterfly, and Judgment Day. I thought the Fox and the Hollywood is interesting because this is very popular. Butterfly is kind of like a symbol of rebirth from death of the moth. Judgment Day. I want people to remember that one. And Judgment Day. That's very important, I think. Then Madison, just her name alone: Corona, Crocodile, and Ishtar. Nothing crazy. Her last name, NASA, Cancer. Now, the cancer symbol is in the middle of the Masonic pillars. So I did highlight that. And Simba. It's funny that I'm bringing that up, but you'll see.
Well, NASA, that's interesting because we're back to, again, the origins of that town and the university both of this Pleiades Club.
Oh.
This club that had some sort of veneration for the constellation Pleiades. I believe it's the Seven Sisters. I think there were seven wives of the original employees of the university to include the original founder and dean of the university. His wife, I believe, was the leader of that club.
There were 7 phone calls made earlier.
There you go.
With Xana, her first, just that name, you do get Scorpio, which can be associated with death, and Anubis. So I thought that was interesting. Starman, CERN, interesting. Then Kernodle, you'll get Moonchild, which is a book by Crowley.
Moonchild.
Fake
Well,
news.
that's interesting because there's one of the corollary things that I think may be going on here is a money laundering operation out of a Moonstone bank just north of the university.
And then her name also matches Judgment Day, Tower of Babel, and The Lion King.
Oh, there you
The
go.
reason I even highlighted this stuff, and it's for the people, I guess, listening, and this might come out before part 3 does. When I even cover the eye, I'm doing occult symbolism in your head. I started running numbers on stuff in the eye in the 3rd part. Yo, I came up with Scar, The Lion King, Simba, and another name. All 4, like, they were all matching parts of the eye. And I'm like, that's not by fucking accident. I'm sorry.
So this is kind of a synchronistic event.
Yeah, yes.
Simba and Lion King
Which is why I have it highlighted. Because I'm like, so that means these numbers, I didn't want to go through it. I pulled up Wednesday. Somewhere where I was showing either God names or parts of the eye, these numbers came up then because I saw them. So this is actually weird for me.
For sure.
Then you got Kaylee Gonzalez. That one does have Anton LaVey. I thought that was interesting.
Okay. That is interesting.
But you know what? I might have screwed that up. I think I'm almost positive there was an Anton LaVey on one of the other ones, which is why I thought it was interesting. Maybe I didn't highlight it or I'm confused, but I'm almost positive Anton LaVey came up twice, which is, under Madison Mogan, you get Anton LaVey as well, right here. Mm-hmm. And then for the other girl, her full name, you get Anton LaVey spelt that way, and then I think Anton LaVey spelt the correct way, unfortunately. But his name comes up for both names. And then here I just have the house with the 33.
I like that analysis. I find it intriguing that I saw a number of zodiac symbols that showed up in there as well. Again, back to this astrotheological aspects.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm done. That was just my weird spiel with numbers.
No, it's awesome. I like it. Now, when you sent me that one, the shot the other day that you sent to Ron and I both about the K-bar.
K-bar. Yeah, I wasn't sure how that was pronounced. I thought that was weird. I was like, come on, that equals 33 too. And they're like making such a big deal out of that fucking sheath.
Exactly.
It's like the glove from fucking OJ.
I like to, that's exactly how I compare it to, and I call it the alleged sheath because it seems like they haven't produced a picture, the sheath, the DNA evidence, and they refuse to even do any of that to present that to the Kohberger defense.
Yeah, that is even something I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think don't they point that out in the new thing when they were asking for like the evidence? I think the judge even finally gave them a date and said you have to have it by now, or like this is ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think they even specified they want the. Oh, God, the handling of it. There's a certain phrase to it, like every time that touches someone's hands, that's supposed to...
custody.
Yes, because I think they're saying if you look at the video footage where you say you found that sheath, it's not in the fucking picture.
Exactly.
So we want to know how you found that sheath where it's not at in the video.
That's a great point. If I can respond to that and then respond to Ron's previous question real quick.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah. I'm sorry, Ron.
There is no agreement on there's no clear agreement on when the sheath was seized into evidence, by whom. The responding officers all have seemingly different statements in regards to the location and whereabouts of the sheath. They simply just very in an ambiguous manner say we found the sheath in the bedroom, and then again there's some conflicting statements as to precisely where it was found. But you typically would say we found this item at this date, and this officer sees that and put it into custody because you need that for the chain of custody. And that does not exist right now in any of the indictments of the that were released for the arresting affidavits and the arrest of Kohberger.
JJ, do we know for sure if they actually have a sheath?
I like where your head's at, Ron, because that's where I'm at. I'm gonna, until I see any sort of seemingly objective evidence that there is in fact is a sheath, I'm not willing to believe there is one.
Well, wouldn't a sheath be included in crime scene photos?
Not only would it be included in crime scene photos, you would think if they seized the sheath at the scene on November 13th, that the Whitman County prosecutor and its officers are not filling out affidavits on or about December 30th saying, we need to search Kohberger's Washington State University apartment looking for a knife and its sheath. Well, if you're looking for a knife and its sheath, why? Because you already found a sheath on November 13th. And even further on that, the prosecutor from Whitman County tells the judge, pay no attention to this DNA evidence that was found on the sheath. So you have the law enforcement saying they're looking for a sheath out of Whitman County. You have the prosecutor out of Whitman County at the date of his arrest in December saying, pay no attention to this alleged DNA evidence on this knife sheath. So again, it draws into question, is there a knife sheath? Because if that's your primary piece of evidence and you want to get a search warrant from a judge, you're not going to tell that judge, pay no attention to this evidence. There's still probable cause without this evidence was that prosecutor's statement. Now, you go back over to Latah County and considering their actions relative to the sheath, they don't want to release the photographs, the DNA evidence, or any information on the chain of custody of the sheath. Well, is there a sheath? That's where, so that's where I'm at too with it.
Well, when he says don't pay any attention to the DNA evidence on the sheath, that would imply that there was DNA evidence on the sheath.
Yeah.
It would.
And maybe they don't want them to pay attention to it because the DNA doesn't match anybody that was there or Kohberger.
That's a good point, because there was, according to the most recent filing by Kohberger's counsel, in the third opposition to the state's third denial of the discovery documents, the discovery evidence, including the sheath, including the DNA evidence, including the genetic genealogy investigation, because the state of Idaho's official position since March was, we're not going to use the sheath, we're not going to use the genetic DNA to convict Kohberger. We have a case without it. And Kohberger's counsel says, that's BS. You guys have no case. And we question basically whether or not you even have the sheath at this point. And
right.
Again, that is what's currently playing out right now. And it seems to be that, if there was a sheath, it wouldn't be this difficult, right?
Number one, if there is a sheath found at a crime scene, they would not touch that sheath until it was mapped out.
Yep.
And crime scene photos taken.
Absolutely.
Then the sheath would have had to been put in an evidence bag without contaminating it in any way.
Bagged and tagged.
Yep. And they would have had to present the knife sheath as evidence.
Absolutely.
So if there's DNA on this knife sheath, in actuality, this DNA could actually take Kohberger off the list.
Absolutely, and that could be the exculpatory evidence that his attorney has referenced.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Because they have referenced exculpatory evidence, and they're back and forth on this discovery, so that could be part of it. I think you are on target with that, because according to the most recent filing, the third opposition filing of the state denying the discovery, Kohberger's counsel says there's three other male DNAs, evidence of three other male DNA samples located in and around the bodies at the crime scene. And so not on the bottom floor where the bodies weren't found, right? According to Kohberger's counsel in this most recent filing from June 22nd, it was stated there's three other male DNA samples that law enforcement has not identified.
And there was only one male that was killed and one male in the house at the time, correct? Or was there a second male?
According to, I actually think there's a lot of people in and out of that house before, during, and after.
Okay, true, correct. Yeah. From some even the witnesses saying that it was definitely a party house and drugs were sold out of that house.
But no, I'm just saying that night.
Whistleblowers saying that as well.
Yeah, but that night, I think that, especially in the morning, because it seems like there was folks that cleaned up and everything else, even amongst the college students. So, could there be samples that were left then? Possibly, right? Possibly. But if you're finding DNA evidence in a house and the DNA evidence is in and around the victims' bodies, and law enforcement's not identifying these people, right? At least right now, it's not known that they identified him. Right now, law enforcement's position is, yeah, we identified them, but they weren't suspects and they weren't important, so we're not going to tell you about them. Well, that's not how the due process system works here in our nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are the games they're currently playing with that DNA. Now, according to law enforcement, in some of their filings recently on the discovery, the state of Idaho claims that they identified they don't claim that they identified those 3 suspects. They claim that they had other suspects. They took DNA evidence from those suspects, and those suspects did not match these other samples. And one of those suspects did not give up his DNA willingly. That's not incriminating. If someone asked me for my DNA, I would tell them nope. But apparently they followed one of those alleged suspects around. The state authorities there in Idaho followed an alleged suspect around back in December and got a used cigarette butt to determine that he didn't match the male DNA they found. Mind you, if they didn't identify the male DNA, then it draws into question the nexus point and how they landed on Kohberger, which again, that's something, as you pointed out, that the Kohberger's counsel has lambasted in these recent filings on June 22nd. It's basically saying you've got no nexus point with my client. He even goes as far as say my client doesn't even know the victims. There's no evidence of any phone calls or social media stuff. These were all some of the false narratives purported, by News Nation and other outlets like that. So yeah, if you at the end of the day, they go to trial without identifying those 3 other male DNA samples, that in and of itself would be exculpatory.
Yeah. You know what, JJ, if they have a sheath, but they want a warrant to go look for a sheath, that's sketchy there. But when we're talking about knives, what about this other individual that's name, and I can't remember his name, but he had an odd last name that was kind of a suspect that they were thinking was in some of the Twitch video footage from the food truck that was hanging around with these girls, before they went home, and they had searched him out. And I guess his family was very well off. And there was also a dog or some type of pet that they had found skun near, in that general region where they're thinking that this kid had done that and he was very handy with a knife. And then this kid disappeared.
Yeah, you were correct on all those, that interpretation of events. One of the fraternity brothers of, I believe it was the same fraternity as Kaylee Gonzalez's ex-boyfriend, Jack. And I believe this individual's name was also Jack, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, you're right. He has some familial connections, and I believe on his maternal side to the Idaho Attorney General's office. So there are some kind of connections there from a power political position. Yeah. Seemingly to me, the way I looked into that, I never again the interwebs went amok with blaming this guy as being the murderer initially. So Kaylee Gonzalez's sister is the one who accessed her phone, apparently, from statements that the Gonzalez family's made. And she's the one who first identified that they went to the food truck. And then the food truck has a video on Twitch, so then she accessed that. And it's also something that law enforcement organically seemingly wanted to produce. Now, I think a lot of people want to make a lot of things out of that with that student you're referring to. And he is a hunter, so he is skilled with knives. I remember looking at his social media account back in November, and he did have clearly was a skilled hunter, and clearly, when you're a hunter, as I'm sure Ron, you're familiar with, you have to skin that animal before you take him out of the woods. So
yeah, I never have, but I have a nephew that can skin a bear in no time.
There you go. See?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is a skill set. If you're a hunter, you have to learn that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there is some circumstantial evidence, I think, that caused people to be concerned about him as being a suspect. I looked at the guy's body language on the Twitch video. I never saw anything nefarious out of it. I believe statements later he made to police was he was just trying to help them get home safely, I believe, or something in that regard. Now, a later video was released from that corner club bar that I was referring to earlier, where Gonzalez and Mogan had clearly had some face-to-face interactions. They looked friendly by all appearances of their still shot images that were released at that corner club bar with Kaylee Gonzalez's ex-boyfriend, Jack. Now, the other fellow was there at the bar with him, and he walked with those girls to the food truck, and a surveillance video from that walk was later released by an anonymous party, and it showed those girls walking very friendly with that guy, and seemingly he was just helping them, get somewhere safely. Now, there was a lot to be made of conversations that were had during that surveillance footage, because I believe it was Madison Mogan had made a statement to that guy that she had told this other fellow, another one of the Greek students there, another one of the fraternity brothers, saying that she had told him everything. That was overheard on the surveillance footage. I think there was a lot of conclusions drawn from that. I try not to draw any conclusions, but it is grounds for further inquiry, because, if they're saying statements that even seem like somebody may be out to get them moments before, hour and a half before they're apparently murdered, that seems to be something that law enforcement should look further into.
I have somebody in the chat saying that his name is Jack Showalter, and he said they are going to get you.
Yep. I mean, yeah, that's what I hear on the video too. They're going to get you.
He told Adam, and Adam is Jack D's roommate.
Yep. Adam.
So now you're saying, though, that they have footage of the same night of them at least talking, or this guy being there?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, isn't that even weird, though, if you think about it? Now, I don't know what time do you know what time the footage is supposed to be at where they're getting this food?
Yeah, I mean, it's about 10 till 10, or about 1:45 or so. It was right prior to them taking a private car ride service to get back to their house, which I think dropped them off at 1:45. So immediately preceding that.
And then an hour later, you got the ex-boyfriend who's friends with that dude blowing both their phones up.
Exactly. So that's what I find interesting. You just nailed it, Nick. So if she told Adam everything, and then this Showalter fella is saying, well, they're going to get you, or something into that regard, because there is probably some interpretation that the audio is not fantastic, but that is what I hear on it as well. I'm not saying that is what's said, but that is what I hear. And so yeah, you brought up the elements right there. So Adam clearly knows Jack D, the ex-boyfriend of Kaylee Gonzalez. And again, I tend to think that all data and details and facts seem to point that this crime occurred that weekend because Kaylee Gonzalez was back in town.
I was going to mention that too. I forget about that. And that is actually, I do think that's an important thing to take into mind. She had already left that place and just happened to be back.
Yep.
That could be timed.
It serves for, it almost points to a crime of opportunity, the opportunity that she was back in town.
So you're saying that the murders may have been planned out prior
Definitely
to
premeditated, possibly, yeah.
Yeah, and they were waiting for her to come back into town to kill her?
Absolutely. Now, to add some more intrigue to that statement, Ron, one thing I looked at back in the fall was the Google searches for these names of these victims prior to the murders. So for the weeks preceding the murders, roughly October 15th to November 12th, let's call it, there was a significant amount of Google searches for these victims' names, with the exception of the surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen. Her name was not being Googled. And I find the areas in which these Google searches were occurring, they don't tell you the exact city and location. It comes up in a region. But I find it very interesting, the regions of Nevada and the state of Washington that these Google searches were occurring from in the weeks preceding the murders, and they were searching these girls' names. So if you were going to if it was a premeditated crime, which this one obviously has all the hallmarks of a premeditated, crime, you're going to stalk these people through the internet, and you're going to Google search their name if you don't know their social media, to look up what social medias they have. And if you have numerous someone's doing that would then substantiate why there are numerous, a large volume of Google searches occurring in more than one location. I think the top 3 locations, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, were Spokane area, Spokane, Washington, Boise, Idaho, and in and around the location where surviving roommate Bethany Funk comes from in Nevada.
Okay, so that's a very interesting thing, JJ. If there were Google searches for the three girls, right? Mm-hmm. Were there Google searches for the one guy?
Ooh, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't want to give you the wrong answer on that, because I don't remember I do recall the female, the occupants of the home. Even Bethany Funk seemed to have Google searches for her name, and she's a surviving roommate. The one that didn't was Dylan Mortensen, and she's from Boise, which again was one of the locations. I believe that was the number 1 location for a number of these Google searches.
Interesting.
Boise region.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, and that means somebody's checking them out and somebody's lining it up for sure, which is really sloppy if you're using Google to do a search for something like that. Yeah.
Criminals aren't known to be smart, Ron. You know what I mean? Like,
well, they could use VPNs, right? And they could also get rid of that stuff.
And again, if it's some sort of hit or something along those regards, as far as what went down here on November 13th and that led to the murder of these young college students, maybe they didn't care. Maybe they knew there was going to be no investigation,
or they knew they weren't going to get caught.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of criminals that use Google for searches that know how to get rid of the search.
Right.
Or who knows? They could have been using a random laptop or a computer somewhere else.
You can go to a public library. You're hard to trace somebody in a public library going to use a free computer and not having to log into anything. You just use like a guest pass or something from the library.
Okay, but there's still going to be an IP address. Did they look into the IP address, the actual address, to see where this computer that was logged on to Google was located? Do we know that?
I haven't seen any indication from any of the court filings from the state of Idaho that would imply that they even cared to look at these details.
Okay, well, that would be real simple. Get the IP address, go to the location, see where the person actually was sitting and using this device.
And
then ask for any surveillance cameras in that neighborhood. Look at the surveillance cameras around the time that the Google searches were completed, and you might be able to get some type of surveillance footage of the person that was doing the actual searches.
100%. I'm right there with you. Yep.
Yeah.
And I've seen no indication that any sort of investigatory line was taken along those lines. And again, just back to what they have produced, the state of Idaho and these filings, they have cell phones that they have unidentified numbers and owners of those numbers that they've conducted search warrants on. They have the state of Idaho. They did search warrants for bank accounts, numerous bank accounts that to date, no one has identified the owner of these bank accounts or why the state of Idaho's, subpoenaing the records to search them. So, yeah, I think you may bring up some good points, and it seems like to me, it just seems like it was a non-issue. It was a non-starter for the investigation. The investigation was Brian Kohberger did it. Again,
he was the focal point. He was the focal point of this investigation from the get-go, if not before the murders were even committed.
I'm glad you said it, because if you're gonna run an operation, if you're gonna run a hit from any sort of organized criminal perspective, you're gonna want your fall guy identified in advance,
right?
And you're gonna want to keep continuing to bend in the narrative and the investigation to that individual, not necessarily overtly and immediately, because that draws into too many questions and draws the attention of people, but to do it slowly and behind the scenes and under some veil of confidentiality, which is precisely what's occurred here. And if I can just share with you a couple statements, quick quotes from the recent filing on June 22nd, it speaks to that, right? So Kohberger's counsel on the June 22nd motion in opposition to the state still denying discovery, right? Still violating Kohberger's rights to due process. The attorney wrote, "No matter what came first, the car or the genetic genealogy, the investigation has provided precious little." I think that speaks volumes. It's a brief sentence. It's not disrespectful necessarily to the state, even though I could never, if I was in their position, it would be a lot worse of a statement for me, But another one is there's no connection between Brian Kohberger and the victims. Flat out said that in the filing, right? So that I think again that speaks volumes, right? Because and that speaks even more once I read this last one here. There is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence of the victims in Kohberger's apartment, his office, his parents' home, or his vehicle, right? So they're saying, look, if you got this knife sheath and it has this touch DNA on a button, why is there no other DNA evidence anywhere else, right? And I'm sorry, there's one more. In essence, through the lack of disclosure of discovery, and their motion to hide the genetic genealogy investigation, again, the state says that's not important now. The state is hiding their entire case. That was the sum total of what the filing was on June 22nd. And that's accurate. The state is hiding their entire case. So again, it seems, I think all of those statements to me, in my mind, the one thing it points to is Kohberger was the guy from day one, or at least probably before, you're right. But at least he was the guy early on in the investigation, and there was no other inquiry anywhere else.
What's really mind-boggling to me is I am not an investigator. Although
could have shocked me, Ron. You do a lot. You have some good questions.
Well, in my previous life, They like to have me around for my critical thinking skills like that.
There you go.
So,
Well, if I may interject, it sounds like you investigate the problems with automobiles and are able to diagnose those issues. So, in a sense,
well,
you do kind of investigate.
that too. But in my previous life,
Investigative mind, yeah.
Investigating. Okay, who's doing what? Why are they doing it? Who's working with them?
Yeah.
We'll get into it more some other day out there. But point is, I'm not an investigator. And I'm just a garage guy that works on cars, right? Mm-hmm. But it would make sense to do the IP address search.
Oh, absolutely.
That's like shit you'd see on First 48. It's like common.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, but and why? That's not even from TV. That's just common sense.
Yeah,
but you know what? JJ, I got a question on the actual DNA evidence that they allegedly do have on Kohberger, right?
Yep, hit me.
Did they say it was such a minute amount of evidence in that there's a theory that the FBI actually manufactured or did some manipulation to this whatever DNA evidence that they had that was extremely minute to make it somehow to some degree match Kohberger, when in fact it may not have matched him at all? Because when you're talking about DNA evidence, right, there's none left on the scene other than allegedly on the knife sheath that we don't even know if actually exists or not. And
Absolutely.
none associated with Kohberger in any way at the scene or in any of his personal effects. Yep. His car, his clothes, his apartment, his office at work, his classrooms at work. No DNA evidence there whatsoever. Now I've listened to some other people talk about this, and they say, well, that's not really that big of a deal. I disagree.
It's a huge deal.
It's the hugest deal, because they were even talking about there was no footprints left at the scene. Of course, in part one, we talked about the possibility of there being a cleanup crew, right?
Well, the evidence supports that. If you find a latent shoe print, which is a shoe print that is developed through putting some chemicals on the floor and dropping some powder on it, well, it implies that floor had been cleaned up.
Yeah, was whoever committed this, were they walking around with those surgical footies on?
Right.
I mean, it's totally plausible.
It could happen, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it would imply that there was a greater degree of forethought in that. And if Kohberger was walking around with these booties on the plastic booties on his shoes, like, where did they go? Why is there no evidence outside the home of blood trails to a car or anything like that?
Well, just to give the listeners a visual, in one of the closing scenes in the movie The Departed,
good movie.
Mark Wahlberg's character, who was a Boston police officer, was dressed all in surgical. He had gloves on and he had those footies on. Yep. And he waited for Matt Damon's character to open up the door, and he took him out.
Yep.
And he just calmly walked out.
Great scene.
Yeah. Who's to say that this wasn't possibly a similar scenario?
So I'm saying, like, if people are actually, like, know what they're doing, have no fear of the situation, and just go in and, like, be just basically like surgical. Mm-hmm. You just go in and do what you do. Like, it could easily just, like, it could have been such a different scenario than what we think. Yeah. It could have been two people that just walked in and just jacked two people real quick and walked out like they just did nothing.
Okay, so this was not a random, out of rage, out of jealousy, out of whatever fixation an individual had with these ladies.
Nope. And in fact, law enforcement said that from day one, right? They said it was an isolated, targeted attack. Just
didn't come across himself to go, you know what? I'm going to go over to that place on King Road. I'm going to kill everybody in the house.
Right.
Because if they're in that frame of mind, they're going to make a mistake. They're going to leave evidence. Because they're not in their own mind.
Yeah, I mean, trust me. I mean, based upon at least on my experience as a law enforcement officer for years in the U.S. Air Force, military police for 20 years, and just my training. I have a vast amount of training in close quarters combat, SWAT operations, etc. I was a SWAT team leader at the age of 19 in the Air Force, so I have I'm trained to operate with precision and shoot, move, and communicate scenarios. And I'm going to tell you right now that you would have to be a professional on some next level to go into a home like that, even 1, 2, and regardless of how many people actually committed this crime, to go in there, not leave a shred of evidence.
Yeah, and let me add something to that. if this was a professional hit, and we're going to get into possibly some reasons why we think that it might be.
Absolutely.
The hitmen are not going to waste their time planting evidence because they know they're not going to get caught.
Right.
So this brings in the whole knife sheath thing again. They are not going to take the time, let's plant this to get them off our track. There's not going to be any track that leads to these guys. It's just not going to happen.
Because they're going to walk in just like that dude did.
Yeah. And
in and out, and that's it.
If they avoided any type of getting caught on camera, that just alludes to the fact that they are professionals. If they staked this place out, if they stalked these girls and knew their whereabouts at any given time or knew when they were going to be back at this apartment, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to know where every single surveillance camera is, and they're going to avoid them, or they're going to use evasive tactics to avoid showing up on any type of camera, especially a Ring door camera.
You're spot on, Ron. And again, there's a lot of questions about these surveillance images and surveillance footage of the alleged vehicle. So in the most recent June 22nd filing from Kohberger's counsel, they call out law enforcement by saying, you haven't produced any of these images. You haven't produced how these were collected, the searches that were conducted in which to achieve these surveillance videos. They draw into the Kohberger's counsel draws into question whether or not it's even a white Hyundai Elantra in the image that they have shown and provided to his counsel. And they even argue, the Kohberger's counsel argues, the one primary video footage they're using is a vehicle that is driving in the wrong direction at the wrong time on the wrong road to fit the actual timeline that police are trying to convict Kohberger under. So
yeah, and we talked about that briefly in part one. That whether or not it was, Kohberger's car or not, I can tell you right now that every little 4-door white sedan, I don't care if it's domestic made or foreign made, they all look the same in some type of nighttime blurry surveillance cameras. These cars are not distinguishable from each other. Absolutely. You really got to know cars, and I know cars.
Right.
And I'm looking at that video, and I'm like, okay, that could be an Elantra, could be an Optima, right? Could be a Malibu, could be a Corolla. Well, there's no way of knowing for sure because these cars are all look-alike cars. And the fact that this car was not even going in the right direction, not even in the same area,
right?
But it was blurry enough that they used this to their advantage, like the blurry Bigfoot photos. Exactly. Oh, that's Bigfoot. To say, okay, well, this guy's driving a white Elantra, so we need to get some type of surveillance somewheres that shows some type of little white sedan so that we can use that to back up our, whatever our case is, even to go get a warrant. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure to get a warrant, they brought that into play.
I have no doubt they used it for probable cause. Yeah.
Okay. So listen, what about this real quick before we get on to the next thing?
Well, can I add a bookend on your point?
Oh,
there?
Sure.
Just real quick.
Sure. Go ahead.
So Nick brought it up earlier. So one of the things I found strangest, this one infamous image of this vehicle that is driving the wrong direction on the wrong road type of business was released by a gas station, a surveillance footage of a gas station manager who was not interviewed by police, who saw the police press conference on December 7th and said, well, I'll go look on my footage because we have a run along their gas station was along a main thoroughfare of town, heading out of town. And again, that one's heading out of town, but the police responded by going to that gas station and taking their gas pumps. The vehicle in the footage never even stopped at the gas station. Why would you be taking their gas pump? It was almost like a childish retribution, like, hey, don't you blow up our, malfeasant investigation here, and we're going to go ahead and punish you now for even bringing this stuff to light and ruining our storyline, because that seems like kind of what occurred there.
And what reasoning would there have been to take the gas pumps?
Great question.
Were they thinking that Kohberger, after he killed all these guys, stopped by and got, some a Snickers bar, maybe a Monster drink, and got a few gallons of gas after? Well, and they think they're going to get DNA off the gas pumps? Come on.
Exactly. So again, in the video footage, the vehicle doesn't stop at the gas pump. So why would you go take the gas pump, right? And I'll even one more to add a quick bookend to the whole vehicle situation. I believe I sent both of you gentlemen the picture of the police picking up a coat about 400 meters. It was located about 400 meters in front of the 1122 King Street home. And in their early on investigation, it was some media footage of the investigators. They found a coat near a fire hydrant, right?
Yes.
Well, the coat seems to have a very distinct quality to the left arm, which is this white tag, and that's the same oversized, clearly a male's coat that victim Madison Mogan was wearing at the food truck and at the corner club bar surveillance imagery, right? And it's fairly distinguishable by this white tag on the left arm, and that's the same white tag you see on this coat that the police are picking up after the murders. Well, directly in front of that fire hydrant on the night of the murders and around 3 a.m., there was two non-uniformed Moscow PD officers sitting in an unmarked silver sedan that looks eerily similar to an Elantra, sitting right there at that fire hydrant, right? And this was kind of infamously seen across the known band field, not Ashley Band Field, but Band Field, which is the vacant field that sits adjacent to the Creek Road there on the edge of campus, right near the murder scene. And the cops had chased these underage college students inside them for public intoxication or underage consumption. So, how is that the vehicle that they're seeing in the footage? Is it the law enforcement Moscow PD's unmarked car with these guys that are stopping drunk college students? And that's one question. Question number two in that situation is, how does that, if that is Madison Mogan's coat, it was a male's coat she was wearing. I've never seen any identification of the male who owned that coat. But how does it get roughly 300 or 400 meters away from the home that she was dropped off at the front door of and landed the same spot where a video footage, patrol cameras showed that law enforcement was sitting right there at that site? So if she's dead at 4 a.m., she got home at 1:56. How did that coat get to a location where the law enforcement was already sitting right there?
I have like a half-ass answer to that.
What do you got?
Okay, so say she's wearing this coat when she gets in this ride-sharing car.
Mm-hmm.
Say she's in this ride-sharing car and she's being rude to the driver. We don't know. Have they even talked to the ride-share car operator?
They allegedly, yes, and they cleared him early on, and apparently the Ring doorbell camera on the 1122 King Street house caught Kaylee and Madison entering back into the home that morning around 1:56. Because initially the police were saying it was 1:45, I believe. There was some disagreement on time. The police said one time, and then the Gonzalez sister looked on her phone, and the Ring doorbell camera determined it was another time, I believe 9 minutes later. So I think it was 1:45 or 11 minutes later, 1:45 to 1:56. But that Ring doorbell camera should show whether or not she was wearing that coat on the way in.
Okay, so that's a good point to make, because that would kind of go against my theory.
Mm-hmm. You're thinking maybe she threw it out the window or something?
She either threw it out on the way there. Now, was this location of this fire hydrant on the way, or was this
side of the road,
or was it going away?
It would have been. They would have kind of driven past it on the opposite side of the road from where the fire hydrant was on the way back to the house.
Because here's a couple scenarios. She could have had the coat in there, and she's like, you know what? Screw this coat. Boom, threw it out the window. Or she may have left it in the vehicle. Probably, possibly could have been rude to the driver. I know if I was the driver and I found your personal belongings that you left in the car, I'd be screw them. I'd throw them right out the window. Never saw them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, those are just possible. A couple of scenarios. That's a possibility. But the coat thing is interesting. And it's also interesting how this police vehicle was parked in this same location where this coat was discovered.
Exactly. Now, and it's a silver sedan that looks eerily similar to an Elantra.
Silver and white at night under lights looks very similar,
mm-hmm.
especially if the lights are yellow tinted.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to tell the difference, right?
Absolutely.
So I have another vehicle question.
Let's go.
What do we know about the luxury black SUV that was seen at the scene leading up to that? Because who usually operates luxury black SUVs?
Drug dealers.
Drug dealers or black op people?
Yeah, certainly possible. I think that's the most intriguing part I found about Anand Harsh's statements, because he was the one who said he saw that vehicle there.
Oh, that was Harsh that said that?
That was Harsh that said that, yep.
Okay.
He was a chef. As you said, he goes by Chef Dizzy on his social medias.
Yeah.
And he returned back home late at night after closing down the restaurant and saw that vehicle sitting there. And, he seemed to be a car guy and kind of, into that kind of thing. And that's why he took note of it, because he thought it was a fancy looking car. And I think that's great. That's a great question, because from everything I can gather and all the law enforcement documents released, there was no inquiry into the whereabouts or ownership of that vehicle.
All right, JJ, let me ask you this because you might know more about his statement than I do. Did he say that it was a larger SUV or a smaller luxury SUV, say like an Audi Q Series or a Porsche Cayenne or even like a Chevy Equinox or something, Nissan Rogue?
No, I think
something that size.
Yeah, you nailed it. It's like a mid-size luxury SUV. I believe he referenced it as a BMW with. He thought it was BMW. He thought it had. He stated it had tinted windows, and he stated it had luxury rims, kind of nicer.
Yeah, so it could have been like an X5 then.
And exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking. Yep, the mid-size kind of BMW SUVs. Yeah. He also mentioned it had out-of-state plates. He thought it was Utah or maybe Arizona or like a state with mountains in it. I'll even go you one further and say Montana, right?
Doesn't Colorado also have mountains on their license plates?
Yeah, so there's a lot of those states around that area do have mountains on their license plates. So he said it was an out-of-state plate in his statements, and if that is true, I mean, let's say this is part of a larger, Greek and sorority kind of drug trafficking operation network. I find it interesting that the University of Idaho was hosting a woodsman or outdoors sports league tournament that weekend amongst the conference. I think it's Mountain West Conference, I believe. So, in theory, there was a lot of college students in town that weekend in Moscow, Idaho, that were very skilled in all the y'all familiar what I'm talking about with the outdoorsmen and like woodsman series kind of sporting competitions where they use the axes and the saws and possibly even knives.
Mm-hmm. That's just wild.
Yeah, nice. Throwing the axes, throwing the knives. Yeah, sure.
So like let's say for example you're a student at Montana State in Missoula, Montana, or even U of M or Montana State, Missoula or Bozeman, right? Let's say you're just going to drive over to Moscow for that tournament, right? Let's say you're a Greek student, part of a fraternity, or whatnot, and you're also involved in this potential drug trafficking network operation amongst these organizations, and I think it's certainly grounds for further inquiry because if you're seeing a fancy SUV like that, maybe that was a college student. It might not be a drug dealer, right? Maybe maybe they are dealing drugs. I'm just saying maybe it's not like a local drug dealer, right? Maybe it's a college student who's in town for this tournament who happens to just be very skilled in knives.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. Good angle right there. In my opinion, not sounding elitist, but a BMW X5 to me isn't really that great of a car. So,
right.
That would be something that you would buy for your kid.
That's where my head was at.
That's nothing that I would like myself.
Right. That's where my head was at. Yeah.
This is coming from the guy with the $70,000 pickup truck. So.
Nice.
Oh,
so you agree? You could see maybe there was some sort of fraternity student who.
Absolutely.
There was something I wanted.
These other universities in town that weekend for the woodsman sports.
Yeah.
There was something I want to touch upon with this whole drug aspect, because I have heard like a lot of different stories about that. There's like a few things that I was going to ask you guys, maybe if you've heard of it, if there's any validity to it. One thing I do want to just mention real quick, there was somebody in the chat who was telling a story that I have heard, and they mentioned a name that I actually remember seeing before, so this is really interesting to me. It could be nothing. Have you heard of like the whole thing where I think one of them flushed drugs down the toilet and supposedly like that's why they might have had a problem with somebody? It was like a fuck ton of drugs. Have you heard of like that story at all?
I think those are
that they were running drugs through the house.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I found it. They were running drugs through the house. They were after Maddie because she flushed it. That's why Kaylee moved out early. And then the same person, Love MJ2 in the chat, he says, and then he mentioned something about somebody named Quinn. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Where I think that the weird thing is what he was saying is I think that one of the drug dealers or somebody with the name Quinn they were tied to. Quinn does come up under Madison's name in Gematria. I did notice that earlier, but didn't mention it because he was like, why, Quinn. But that name even matches her name.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I can respond to some of those points. Those are definitely amongst the rumor mill. I feel like a lot of the flushing of the drugs came from statements made by that fraternity student who was brother of the overdose death fraternity president from back in March of this year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Real quick, drug ring run by Kohberger, Demetrius, Emma, Dylan, and her boyfriend Quinn, 275 grand's worth. That's where I saw the Quinn, and I was like, wait, as you guys were talking, I was reading, and I was like, wait, I saw Quinn on there. I hate to like interrupt for that like weird coincidental thing,
No.
I did want to ask about the drugs regardless. Just the drugs regardless.
JJ, hold on. Love MJ2 if you're still in the chats. Who was Constantine? Do we know who this Constantine character is?
I know who Quinn is, and I know who the rest of the characters. I don't know Constantine.
The Demetrius?
Yeah, so he's the drug dealer that was responsible for the murder or the overdose death of the fraternity president back in March. University of Idaho fraternity president.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And Emma's his girlfriend / seemingly maybe he's her pimp. It's strikingly there's a relationship there that screams pimp. He's in his 30s. She's 21 or 22 maybe, and she's of the social that Emma is of the social circle of the victims.
Interesting.
So they live in Moscow. However, for whatever reason, and I can probably provide some speculation, but for whatever reason they were all up in Seattle, and this kid overdosed in Seattle, and then he ended up dying at a hotel room or apartment about an hour and a half east of Seattle. So he went to the ER, got out, and then they apparently traveled with these same two people, and then they died later, possibly of more drugs. Who knows? I don't think it was ever brought into question yet, but they were charged. Demetrius and Emma were arrested and charged with the supplying of the drugs and the death of that student.
Okay, so MJ2 just said that Constantine is the guy that owned the Mad Greek restaurant that the girls worked at.
Yeah, so I mean, there has been a lot of rumor mills around some of those things. I have yet to see anything, with great validity that guy has anything to do with anything. But I think the bigger thing that seems to be, at least we can point to as facts at this time, right? Is I'm not gonna rule it out. It's certainly possible, but if we're gonna try to delineate between rumor mill and fact, this Demetrius character and Emma, Demetrius is absolutely a drug dealer. They've absolutely been supplying to clearly these Greek students, the fraternities and sororities of University of Idaho. The fraternity president of one of these fraternities there died of a drug overdose just in March. And I think that one 7-day span in March seems like such an integral tipping point in this entire case. That was that kid's death. It was and the
JJ, are you talking this last March?
Yeah, March 2023. March 2023.
Oh, so after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so this all occurred in around March 20th to about 20th to 26th of 2023. So the overdose death of the University of Idaho fraternity president, one of the fraternities there, kid who was a president, I believe he was a junior. He overdosed is in Seattle again. So, and I think that's an important point because, for example, the local regional drug task force, which all of the prosecutors, all of the police chiefs, all the people integral in this investigation comprise the board of that regional drug task force, right? So they're already going to know about all these drug activities because they're running the task force. Now, this is interesting because I can't find this case, and it seemingly has been sealed. But last year or 2 years ago? I think it was a press release from 2021. And it stated that task force had busted one of the Washington State University fraternities for the largest Xanax largest pill stamping operation in the state of Washington history. The fraternity was stamping their own pill. They had a pill stamper, making their own pills, Xanax, and they were distributing it all the way to Seattle. So that shows you a drug pipeline network of the distribution from these fraternity Greek students that are of the two universities and all the way to Seattle. So then fast forward March 2023, this fraternity president from Moscow, University of Idaho, he dies of a drug overdose. The initial drug overdose that was in Seattle. Then they picked him up from the hospital, drove him to another location, and he later died at that second location. And it's unknown if he did more drugs or it was somehow derivative of the first drug overdose. And that's, again, how Demetrius, the drug dealer, who I believe he might be 33, Nick. He might be 33 years old. He's definitely in his 30s. And Emma, I believe, I can't recall her last name at the moment, but yeah, Emma's in the social circle of the victims, and again, there seems to be a prostitution and pimp kind of relationship with the between Demetrius and Emma. And then again, it seems to indicate not only there's this larger drug trafficking operation, drug use operation, and it seems to go all the way over to a pipeline that may or may not reach as far as Seattle, if not further. I can't hear you, Ron.
Oh yeah, he muted himself.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I was checking to see if was something wrong with my stuff.
Okay, yeah. So let me start over. I did see there was some reports from the Idaho Drug Task Force that they're admitting that 90% of the drugs that come into the Moscow area are coming from Salt Lake City.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. I've missed that report, but I'd like to read that. Yeah,
Salt Lake City is the actual hub for the drugs, and they're driven directly from there up to Latah County and what's the county Moscow's in?
Oh, Latah County. That's where Moscow is, and then you have Whitman County, Washington, next door.
Yeah. So they know that. Yep. They know these drugs are coming out of there, and a lot of people are saying, "Well, this road that comes out of Moscow goes. You could stay right on that road, and it'll take you right to California." Like I don't think they're going to take the time to drive unless it's in a tractor trailer. The amount of drugs that's going to be profitable to go, all the way from California to Moscow when they can get larger amounts of drugs closer, which is in Salt Lake City.
Well, that's an interesting point. So I haven't read that report, but I have read the report from the Regional Drug Task Force, which includes the folks over there in Latah County, but also includes Whitman County in Washington, Nez Perce County, a lot, I think the 4 or 5 surrounding counties. I have read some of their reports. And, again, the one thing I find most intriguing was one of them was the largest pill stamping operation in Washington state history was being run out of a fraternity on Washington State University campus. Additionally, there was one of the sororities on Washington State campus in 2017 was trafficking in cocaine. So there's another incident. So one obviously, they're getting the materials for the Xanax pill stamping operation from somewhere, but they're using that as a manufacturing and distribution point. Clearly, now with the cocaine. That report from the incident I'm referring to, they claimed it came in from up north in Idaho up through Coeur d'Alene, from the Canadian border down through Coeur d'Alene and down just along the western edge there of Idaho. And I find that intriguing because if you start following that drug trafficking channel up towards the northern Idaho, you're going to find yourself in and around Sandpoint, Idaho, which is home to the Aryan Nation and a Nazi group that was known as the Order, and the Order is documented in years past to be involved in murder and drugs and all sorts of stuff. For example, they murdered a Denver area newsman back in the mid '80s, and that was turned into an Oliver Stone film, of which I can't recall the name of at the moment.
Yeah, so, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. Any of them border towns, it's like that in upstate New York as well. Upstate New York, where you got Montreal and stuff right over the border, that's a big drug alleyway there, and they actually smuggle the drugs through the woods on snowmobile trails and four-wheeler trails. They don't do it on the road.
Yep. Same goes for Vermont. Same with Vermont. That's how they get into Burlington. My area of Vermont's like Burlington. I'm just 20 miles east of Burlington in Huntington, Vermont. That's my region where I grew up.
Yeah, same thing. So JJ, that when you're in northern Vermont and you go up through Milton, I think Milton is one of the last towns before you hit the Canadian border.
Yep.
And then when you cross into the Canadian border, you look around, it's all woods and farmland.
Absolutely.
So there's plenty of places you can four-wheel or take a razor with a little trail and do everything you need to do. You don't even have to take the highway.
Absolutely. So, I don't know specifically the Idaho Canadian border, but I do know the Montana Canadian border because I was stationed in Montana for years in the Air Force, and it's the same environment up there. You have more cattle than you do people.
Yeah, something, just in my opinion, only because there's so many other drugs that are so much worse now. I don't even view coke as being like a hard drug anymore. I guess you could say it is. It is. It's worse than pot, right? But who even thinks of pot being a drug now?
Oh,
nobody, right? So in that whole consensus is starting to take over for coke also. Because it's not these two items that are really causing people to go batshit crazy. What's causing people to go crazy is the heroin and the synthetic heroin, which is the fentanyl. And the fentanyl is the most deadly of all of them. The problem is that they're spiking the coke with fentanyl. They're spiking the marijuana with fentanyl.
Yep.
So now that becomes dangerous.
And I believe that's how I'm glad you brought that up. That was what I wanted to interject there. Yeah. I believe that's how that fraternity president from Moscow, Idaho, University of Idaho, I believe that's how he overdosed back in March. Was reported it was fentanyl laced cocaine, I believe.
Yeah. Actually, a friend of mine went down that way too.
Yep. And it is a growing trend.
Yeah, just a hot dose. That's all it was. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, kind of sad, but I mean, let's. I definitely think that there's a narcotic element to this crime.
I think
it seems.
I really do, because this is when people will just get crazy if you're dealing with cartel members.
Absolutely.
Because cartel members don't care who they kill. Like that, they don't care. So when I was watching a video about the Idaho 4, it kind of brought me into another video about the Goshen massacre up in California, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was two rival gangs. Some members of each gang happened to be living in the same town, and a couple of cartel members went over to this house. They killed everybody in the house. They killed an 18-year-old girl and her baby that was maybe a year old. Mm-hmm. So point is, they don't care who they kill, right?
Right.
Now let's, if we have time, I'd kind of like to go a little bit deeper into the actual logistics of it all and the, the nitty gritty about the two moms and their drug charges.
Yeah, I got time. I'd love to go over that. And I'd also kind of dive into the conspiracy theory deep end, if you will, and go over some of the weirder elements that I think may be going on here relative to the drug trafficking and money laundering operations and relative to the malfeasance of the investigation. Because as Nick briefly brought up before with an individual by the name of Brent Kopacka. Now, I've seen nothing. I've obviously seen rumors. I've seen nothing of fact that would substantiate this man was connected to drug trafficking. However, he is the individual that was involved in the December 15th, 2022 SWAT and hostage situation on WSU campus. Now, he's an intriguing individual, and he has connections directly into the investigators involved in this murder investigation.
And didn't they take him out?
That's the story. And there's been they refuse to release any documents. I've listened to the radio the radio transmissions of the Republic, and and again, I have history in SWAT and environments and situations, and you're not, one thing I noticed on there was people complaining about spilling coffee and someone else to bring someone their coffee during the middle of this allegedly tense hostage situation. When I hear the radio transmissions, nothing to me speaks of it to be legitimate, but the official story goes he held his two roommates hostage in this apartment not too far from Kohberger's building, and there's been really no speak of these two female roommates that were allegedly there, but they were apparently at some point extracted. The building was vacated, and this individual, Brent Kopacka, engaged in a firefight with the local PD over there and was taken out. Correct. Now, did that happen? Again, back to things like the knife sheath. Until they can start substantiating these claims, I'm not willing to believe them.
Yeah, and if they did take this Kopacka out during this standoff, it seems that we would have kind of known or seen some footage of that. And let's get into that a little bit when we go into MJ's kind of theories in the chat here. But and JJ, you're froze up.
Yeah,
can you hear us okay?
Yeah, can you hear us? Ooh, damn.
Oh, we'll give it a second.
Yeah, he froze up earlier before we recorded, and he came back. There we go.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah, he's fine now. Yeah, you're back. I knew you'd come back, so I was like, I'm not gonna boot him yet.
Okay, so real quick, because I kind of want to save it.
Sorry about that. It just timed out on me. So
I want to save it for part 3.
Okay.
But just briefly. Okay, so we got Xana Canoodle, right? Her mom, Kara. She was up on drug charges multiple times, right? I want to say she might have been the one that didn't show up to her sentencing, which was
one of them didn't. Yes,
that following week after the murderers, right? After the murders happened. Right. So you got one mom that's got extensive drug charges, actually takes off and kind of goes on what I call a wobbler. She just went MIA.
No, when they did an interview with her, she looked like a gypsy living out of a car or something.
Yes. Yeah, well, she was. She was living in a ragtag motel, probably living in a car and this and that, all jacked up on fentanyl, and there was one other drug that she was on, probably meth. Okay, so that was Xana's.
Probably was meth because one of her charges was. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna download all the information on all the drug charges, all the court dates, and how they coincide with the actual murder dates and what happened after that. We're definitely going to get into that in part 3. I just wanted to give the listeners a little bit of sneak preview there, right? So then you got Maddie's
Can I add interject one point there?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought her up, Kara Kernodle, because one of her charges was for meth trafficking, the distribution of meth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just possession. We're talking actual drug trafficking and distribution.
Right. And I think there was some type of deal what brought it down to just possession, possibly. Or that may have been Maddie's stepmom, who was Corey Hatrock.
I believe you're right. She pled her case down, right?
Yeah, she pled it down too. So we have these two moms that are involved in what could be considered high level drug trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought them up.
I mean, what they actually charged them with and what they're actually doing could be two different things. If they want to keep them on the string and use them as informants, right?
There you go.
They're going to give them these charges just enough to hang over their head without going too crazy where somebody's going to question, okay, well, if that's the case, why aren't they in jail? Okay, so if they give them just possession charges and let them out, on probation or, house arrest or whatever. Well, if they're on house arrest, they can't really be out and about doing anything. But there's a theory that these two moms, well, one's a stepmom, so let's make that clear.
But I believe Madison Mogen's father also had drug charges.
Okay, so that's something else that we're going to get into because there was an angle with that also, JJ.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is if they've released these people to go gather intelligence and maybe somebody could be compromised that's on the drug task force, would be privy to that information.
Absolutely.
And all they're going to do is say, okay, just go up the ladder, the chain of command a few steps and say, okay, we need to send a message to them to let them know that we know what they're doing and that they need to keep quiet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this could have been the message that they sent. I mean,
I know a real world example of another drug circumstance, not in the state of Idaho, but over in North Dakota, that's coming to my mind, where a college student was arrested for pot possession back in like 2016 or 2017, and the police wanted him to turn as an informant to avoid charges on like a half an ounce of pot or something like that, and he ended up getting murdered over it.
Half an ounce of pot.
Yep, being an informant to avoid charges for half an ounce of pot. So that's a very basic circumstance that doesn't involve all this other extra intrigue. So these circumstances do occur where these drug informants get themselves caught up with the wrong people, just trying to avoid some charges.
Yeah, when all they got to do is do a little bit of short time, keep their mouth shut, and then everything is fine.
Yeah, and possibly just probation in some circumstances.
Yeah, especially nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something you said earlier that I just thought was weird, and this is just like a weird, stoned thought that I had. You mentioned Salt Lake City before as being like the major hub for the drugs to go to, and I'm like, that is like a high Mormon area again, and I don't buy this. This is why I'm bringing it up, but I mean, it's supposedly known, or maybe you guys don't know this, but you have Mormons in Mexico, or on the border that are supposedly fighting the cartel. I don't believe they're fighting the cartel. I don't believe they're against the cartel. I think that is just optics and for people to be like, oh, such nice people. I actually think they're working together. And if that is possible, you talking about cartels and drugs, I could see if the Mormons are involved, why it would be stopping in Salt Lake City before it goes somewhere else.
All right, let me just hit something real quick on that, NY. Remember a few years back where there was an ambush just over the border in Mexico, and they were Mormons that were allegedly going to a wedding? And some cartel members came out and took them all out. One escaped, and they killed kids and everything. And I think the one
women and children.
One little kid escaped and one adult escaped, but they wiped out all of them. Those were Mormons.
I remember that.
Yeah, they're a fundamentalist sect.
Food for thought.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Ron. I got some bad connection here, but yeah. If I can just add some piggyback on your statement, that was the LeBaron family. They're one of the prominent fundamentalist sects, one of the more powerful or richer fundamentalist sects. They're in tight with the Romney sect down there in just south of the border in Mexico, as in Mitt Romney, or as I like to call him, Mittens Romney. His father was actually born on that compound down there, Mitten's father. believe George Romney, who was the governor of Michigan. But even more intriguing in that situation.
Whoa, hold on. Damn, Ron, I had to
Carl
mute you for a second.
Something there for a second. Sound like a bunch of screech and stuff.
Yeah, I gotta turn that.
But the
fucking skinning someone down there.
The LeBaron family portion of down there in the fundamentalist Mexico Mormons down there, the cult Mormons, if you will, because this is the allegedly. I think there's more to it. I think the main mothership in Salt Lake City have used those fundamentalist sects is to do their dirty work, if you will, but it's sanctioned, I think, in large part. That's my opinion, but in regard to the LeBaron family and specifically and the ambush by the drug cartels, which I think you guys bring up a great point here, they were obviously involved in something that the cartels didn't like, and it came out afterwards within the NXIVM trial of Keith Raniere. It's fine. Yeah, that those girls down there out of the LeBaron compound were being shipped to Albany, New York to serve as babysitters within the NXIVM cult.
Oh, and the NXIVM cult was tied in with the child trafficking.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's another rabbit hole we'll have to jump down then.
Absolutely.
Oh, man,
yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. Did you want to get into what do you got for conspiratorial stuff? Let's just see what MJ has to say. He's got some good info, whoever it is. Says that the Kopeka guy was hanging out with Brian. I can only assume that would be Kohberger. Tried to get Brian to go with him in the house. Brian refused, and then Brent figured he was a snitch. Brent went in. Brian took off, and it says L.E. knows about Brent, who's an ex-SEAL.
Oh, law enforcement.
And before that, it says, also said Brian was hanging out with Kopeka, and he was working for the drug task force, which I'm thinking he means Kopeka was working for the drug task force.
Right.
Brent found that he was a snitch and framed him, meaning framed Kohberger. Kopeka and his ex-SEAL friend were the murderers. Interesting theory.
I like the ideas. I mean, some of that is slightly off base as far as factual information goes, and from what I gather, most of it's supposition and rumor mill.
That's why we call it conspiracy,
JJ. Well, what I can say regarding Brent Kopeka is he was a U.S. Army paratrooper, not a Navy SEAL. He served in the 4th Battalion of the down there in Fort Bragg.
That's right. There's somebody connects to that, don't they?
Exactly.
The
primary investigator for the Moscow Police Department is a man by the name of Brett Payne. What I find intriguing here is Brett Payne was a slightly younger ranking, lower ranking enlisted guy to Kopeka at the time. Kopeka, I believe, was an E4. I think Brett Payne was an E2. Private and versus specialist in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Bragg, same battalion, same paratrooper unit. In 2008, 2009, they were stationed together.
Is this what they call Fourth Herd? Were they in Fourth Herd?
That might be one of their nicknames. I'm not entirely familiar. Yeah. But the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg is one of the elite paratrooper units.
Sure.
And what even more interesting, one of the primary knives used by the paratroopers, U.S. Army paratroopers, is a K-bar knife.
Is a K-bar. Yep. Yeah. Did I tell you in the first episode that my dad here that raised me was 11th Airborne, which was part of the 101st paratrooper?
Okay. I think you briefly touched that you had some connections within your family there, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
So he probably owned a K-bar knife.
Probably in a 45. He didn't want to carry anything too heavy.
Right.
But anyways, he was a jump master, so he had a lot of benefits.
Sure.
And one of those was maybe you don't have to carry this heavy machine gun. Here's a 45, a K-bar, and a sewing kit.
No, I know how that goes. When I was a younger enlisted guy in the Air Force, I always got the machine gun. They're like, give it to the young guy who's not very big, and I put on some muscle real fast, carrying around M60.
Yeah. Hey, they locked my dad in the mess hall for 2 weeks because he was too skinny to jump.
Nice.
Yeah, true story.
That was my boat. I was like $160, so soaking wet when I joined. So they're like, "Yeah, put on some muscle, kid. Here's an M60 machine gun."
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, is there connection between Kopeka and Brian Kohberger? Again, I think that's all rumors and supposition and speculation at this point. I've not seen anything factual support that. What does seem factual, if you look at the public service record of Brent Kopacka and the public service record of Brett Payne. They had an overlapping time of service at the same unit at Fort Bragg as paratroopers in 2008, 2009. Now, Brett Payne is from, I've yet to really find great certainty of the location. Brent Kopacka, I keep getting those names swapped out. So I would say Brent and Brett, it's inadvertent, but yeah, Brent Kopacka, I don't know where he's from. I've yet to find out his birth, where the location of his birth, or not so much his birth, but where he was raised and whatnot. Now, Brett Payne is from Moscow, Idaho. He's a graduate, or not Moscow, from the Moscow region, and a graduate of the University of Idaho. Now, he is the lead homicide detective on this case for Moscow PD. And if you recall, where folks of the interwebs listening here today recall as well, early statements made by the Gonzalez family, they were highly critical of the Moscow PD not assigning a more veteran officer. That's because Brett Payne, at the time of the murders, was a 2-year rookie veteran, 2 years only on the force there in Moscow, and he got assigned as the lead homicide detective. He was the rookie of the year, whatever, out of the police academy. I get that. I get that part. I was the top graduate in my police academy class, but at no point in time would I assume that individual would immediately be hoisted into the as lead homicide detective in such a monumental investigation, because in that small town. So I do find it somewhat possibly conspiratorial that Brett Payne is the lead homicide detective when he clearly knows. When he clearly knows the, Kopacka from his Army days, right?
Yeah, I thought that was...
The Kopacka situation, I don't think it's been fleshed out yet, because, again, they refused to answer FOIA kind of requests from over there in Pullman. While the radio kind of transmissions are available, they don't seem to speak to a lot of the circumstances that they claim had occurred. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot, there could be more. There could be grounds, there's definitely grounds for further inquiry. That's kind of all I'm getting at with that one.
Yeah, I just find that, I did find that connection just really weird anyway. It's just even when you have, with all, the weird stuff that we're talking about now, you even toss in, the whole fucking, 4 hours of not calling the cops, or 8 hours, or whatever that shit was. And then tie this, it's just so many levels of just weirdness. It just doesn't make the case look right at all.
At all. And it was nearly 8 hours, 7 hours, 50 minutes, something like that of no, from the standpoint of where law enforcement says the time of death versus when the 911 call was placed.
What's a good, maybe I'll bring it back up when Ron gets back. Sure. I don't know if this is so much conspiracy or fact, but I have heard and come across people saying that even in Snapchats, maybe we mentioned it in the last episode too. Mm-hmm. Something with Snapchats, right? I think there was people even talking about what happened before the police were called. Correct. Is that known as a fact, or is that just conspiracy?
No, it seems to be a point of fact, given the statements of numerous parties that are tertiary to the the circumstances here, whether it be friends or family of the victims or just the fellow college students. It seems that these fraternities and sorority folks would routinely communicate through Snapchat with one another in kind of groups they'd already established, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. So they didn't just get on there that morning and just start adding. They already had it kind of pre-existing groups on Snapchat where they would all share messages.
Yeah.
And apparently, according to all statements, including the fraternity brother of the now deceased drug overdose death president from one of the fraternities there in University of Idaho, he even reciprocated those same statements by saying, that he knew about it as early as 8:30, I think maybe 9 in the morning, via these Snapchat messaging groups. And again, we did discuss it in part one, and I think, again, I don't agree with it, but I think in large part, some of those communications can just be written off as the fact that clearly the scene seemed like it was cleaned up, right, and there was some cover up going on even internally to the college students, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's what they did. A lot of things point to that. However, once again, these organizations, these fraternities, these sororities, they have these kind of group national chapter liability insurance policies, whereas the statements that they're in their guidelines in which to internal to their own fraternity or sorority is, you don't call parents, you don't call police, you notify your chapter, you notify your brothers or sisters within the chapter, and then you send that up the hierarchy of the chapter before you're calling police, before you call families. So that's written down. You know, these are guidelines in which there has been established by these organizations in which to avoid future incidents of liability, because obviously it's been an ongoing problem across the nation where these fraternities and sororities have had hazing incidents, overdose deaths, drinking deaths, folks falling from balconies on the third floor of places or roofs and paralyzing themselves. And as a result of these activities, they've developed a process where they want to contain as much information as possible and limit as much liability as possible, as opposed to paying out tens of millions of dollars, which is what has occurred over and over in these circumstances.
Another thing that I'm not sure if we talked about this too, but I have heard about, like, supposedly I don't know, I wouldn't say cartels, but almost like drug runners or drug gangs. Like, there was one that I think is associated with a fraternity that is in where Idaho is, and I think, like, both campuses. That supposedly the fraternity is in the same one, and that there's another fraternity that's also matches that's in both of them, and, like, supposedly they kind of are like rivals in drug running. Have you heard any stories like that?
I have not, but it wouldn't surprise me, because like many things, I think people looking out for outwards towards the end of any organization, be it an occult organization, the U.S. government, et cetera, these sororities and fraternities, I think people like to look from the outside in, like, hey, everybody gets along in that organization, right? And they think there's not competing factions. I would argue that things replicate themselves in large scales as they do in small. In any small group, you're going to have competing factions, or in a family or anything else like that. And I think you have that in occult organizations. You have that in drug operations, et cetera. So are there competing folks that compete to a certain degree, but then within these fraternities and sororities and drug trafficking, but then later overall they're part of a larger club that will protect itself? It's certainly possible. I think the way I look at it, I think a lot of people want to point to, like, drug cartels, like, oh, Mexican drug cartel did this. I'm not ruling it out at all. I'm not. But what I will say is, if you look at the available facts, if you look at the largest pill stamping operation being run out of this fraternity in Washington State, right? Again, according to the regional drug task force, that's their statements. You look at incidents with cocaine trafficking. Oh yeah, you're good. Background, awesome. You look at the cocaine trafficking of a sorority over there in, I believe it was the same sorority, the Washington State University chapter of the same sorority that Kaylee Gonzalez was a member of on the University of Idaho, right? And again, these two universities are only separated by a few miles, and they act together as one organization, really. The universities do. They have reciprocal agreements and contracts where the universities share certain functions and services, and it seems that these fraternities and sororities for both campuses, while there are independent chapters, they do a lot of activities together, and even in the ROTC program. So University of Idaho doesn't have an ROTC program. They ship all their ROTC students over to the ROTC at Washington State University. That's another example of how these universities share everything. So I think what goes on, if you want to think about cartels, well, there's a cartel already operating in this town, in a sense, with these fraternities and sororities. If you have these instances, the largest pill stamping operation, the cocaine trafficking, right? Are they acting independently from a larger cartel operation? Could they have connections to Mexican drug cartels? These are all possible, but if you want to look at it on the known facts, they already have a cartel operating in these towns with these operations, because, why isn't law enforcement shutting down these drug trafficking operations amongst these Greek and sorority, chapters of these organizations on their two universities? It can't be that difficult.
Yeah, I have a feeling, JJ, that these sororities and fraternities are the local cartel.
That's where I'm at with well, Ron. Now, could they have some other connections to Mexican drug cartels, et cetera? It's possible, but there hasn't really been anything to substantiate those claims yet. But the claims that can be substantiated are these fraternities and sororities appear to be running large-scale drug trafficking operations.
Well, if they're getting large amounts of fentanyl, right, then they got to be getting it from the people that control it, and that would be the Mexican cartels. Sure. Not only, I mean, if they were dealing straightly in meth and stuff like that, well, that's something more that bike gangs, or like you say, the Aryan Nation, and those white supremacy groups, those people would be more apt to be in the meth business. Mm-hmm. Just from, knowledge that I have, based on, other things that have been reported over the years, Absolutely. That this is their drug of choice, right? But if these kids are dealing, fentanyl, well, then they're getting that's coming from Mexico one way or another.
Very likely.
Unless they have a bigger fraternity hub in Salt Lake City that might be dealing directly with the cartels. The cartel brings it to Salt Lake City. They go to Salt Lake City, get it and distribute it maybe to other Greek fraternities at other colleges that are in other states that are close by. They could have the whole area pinned down.
Yeah.
And as long as the Mexicans cartels are getting their money, even if it's on a wholesale level, I mean, I got to think they're okay with that because they don't got to go out and police anything. They don't got to go out and, track down money. They don't got to go do any of that.
Yo, you know where they get that? You know where they get that fentanyl from? I saw that shit on TV recently.
China.
Yeah, I was like, yo, motherfuckers are just sending it from China into Mexico right into here.
Yep.
Well, the Chinese have set up shop in Mexico and taught them how to make the fentanyl. They're actually bringing raw material to Mexico. I swear to God, when I was doing my shit and I was making my steroids and I was ordering the hormones from China, and when I started buying tons, like I was making a fuck ton of shit at one point, they started harping on me to buy fentanyl. Yeah.
And I was like, yo, I even told her, you just jumped like total opposite of like what I'm doing. Like, I don't think anybody's like eating out of dumpsters or robbing a motherfucker because they took some fucking testosterone and Deca. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to be that guy. I was like, but they hounded it to me and they were like, we can send it to you raw and you will make fuck tons of money. And I'm like, I'm good. But yo, they pushed that shit on me from China.
Okay, so where did the original?
May I interject real quick, Ron, to piggyback on your last statement? So let's take it from a psychological perspective of the Mexican drug cartel, right? If you wanted to import large volumes of drugs into this country and you wanted to recruit a network in which to into your drug trafficking operations, why wouldn't the Greek communities of these college campuses be one of your prime targets? It's a very high volume of clientele amongst these campuses, amongst the age group and the volume of college students, and on a nationwide level, right? Because all these chapters already operate on a nationwide organizational level, right? And they also operate with a layer of secrecy amongst the general public. So, in my opinion, if I was operating a Mexican drug cartel operation, I would target the distribution points of being within these fraternities and sororities because of the layer of secrecy, the national organizational network that already exists within their fraternities and sororities. So I think these are great points to bring up as far as possible drug cartel connections from Mexico being on a national level. And again, it speaks back to my previous statement. If the neighbor non-harsh sees this luxury SUV parked at the murder of the 1122 King Street murder house, roughly about the time of the murders, on that morning of November 13th, and as I inferred before, could be one of these Woodsman sports students from another university who's also part of that same Greek community within the fraternity or possibly sorority. They have females that compete in their sports. I think that would speak to the national drug trafficking operations that could be going on here and possibly culprits of this crime that may want to hide that.
Yeah, just in my opinion, cartel members don't have time to do street level stuff.
No, those are low level thugs, or not even tied to the cartel anymore.
Yeah, so they're basically busy human trafficking, which they can make 50 times more the money than drug trafficking, right? Everybody knows that.
Yeah, you can sell a human more than once. You can only really sell the drugs one time.
Yeah, you could sell a human over and over and over again until they're dead, right? But who's to say, another possible conspiracy theory thrown in here, that these two moms know that there is a let's just call it a drug cartel or a crime syndicate, a drug syndicate that is run by these Greek fraternities and sororities.
Sure.
And maybe they're seeing that their daughters are getting in just a little too deep. They're going to use the information as leverage to get out of their charges. And there was possibility that it was leaked that they were going to provide intelligence against this nationwide Greek fraternity on a national level. And that right there would have been plenty of reason to take all these kids out. Absolutely.
And let me ask you all about this one question as far as diving into the conspiracy theory deep end here. And it's one thing I find very intriguing with this case and especially from a circumstantial standpoint, and also from just a practical standpoint, if you're conducting a large-scale drug trafficking operation, what are you doing with the money? You got to launder it somewhere, right? Would you all both agree with me on that one? The money's got to be laundered somewhere. Well, you don't have to go too far to find a massive money laundering operation. In fact, you only have to drive 30 miles north of either city, Whitman, Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, Whitman County, or Moscow, Idaho, Latah County, Idaho there. 30 miles north of both locations, kind of, northeast and northwest, is a town called Farmington, Washington. And it is home to what was formerly known as the Farmington State Bank, which was actually founded in and around the same time as both of those cities, Pullman and Moscow, about 125 years ago. Well, just a few years ago, in 2020, what I'm inferring here is a drug trafficking operation within these communities in those two college towns pre-existed. A new money laundering operation came in town. They became more advantageous for them. They jumped onto that money laundering operation. That's where I'm getting at with this, just to give you a preface to where I'm at.
Okay.
People are going to be like, well, if they only came in 2020 and they've been doing it longer, as you already said, then why would they be involved in this? Well, if you have a new money laundering operation in town and it's better than your old one, well, that's a good time to jump on the new money laundering operation.
Okay, well, what's important to remember with these sororities and these fraternities and colleges in general, you have a constant turnover of new customers.
Exactly.
You do not run out of customers ever. They're not going to shut these universities down, right?
Right.
So, and it's no secret that some banks are money laundering centers for all kinds of people.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. I mean, they have car dealers that they're bringing down up here in New England that are tied in with crooked banks.
If you've had an operation going on,
it's no different.
Ron, think about this. I mean, like, this is something I could see, like, people who've been around for a while, like, mafia, the mob or whatever. Like, you just put somebody into school so they can actually start the whole process and open up a bank specifically for money laundering.
Yep.
Yeah,
and whatever
100%.
customers you get besides that, that's gravy. I would not doubt that, banks exist just to launder money.
That's what they do. That's what they do on a normal day anyways.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, specifically, actually created. We're just going to launder money through this bank.
Ron brings up a good point because they can lend out 9 times what their current holdings are. So, in a sense, you can make the numbers look really wild whenever you want to in that regard.
I mean, it's
you can shift a lot of things around.
If you think, if you're a family that's already been, running shit for 40 years and you're I'm sure, this is just going to keep going on for a while, why would it just, when we were talking about that movie with, when he shot the guy with the booties on? I mean, they put him into the fucking police force.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Let's put people into banking. Start a fucking bank so we can launder it and it's our own company now. I mean, you have no fucking idea how far people could go with shit like that.
Those are good thoughts.
But
so this Farmington State Bank in specific was purchased by FTX, the cryptocurrency folks. FTX, the folks that have been busted for money laundering already. In fact, they were purchased this bank in 2020, right? Along with another cryptocurrency operation out of the Bahamas. That's where FTX was headquartered. It was Deltec and Bank and FTX. They got together and they purchased out of the Bahamas. They purchased this random bank, rural bank that was 125 years old, just north of these two towns. That happened in 2020. Now, in January of 2023, the Department of Justice seized $60 million from that bank over all this FTX corrupt money laundering operation stuff, right? So if you go back and look at the timeline events of this murder, right, on November 13th, roughly 36 hours prior to the murder, FTX files bankruptcy in Delaware, thereby releasing all their financial documents publicly, thereby showing that they purchased out this bank nearly 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago at that point. Now, what I find even more intriguing relative to that bank, 2 things: how they set up the bank and the amount of money was going through that bank, right? So if you folks or any of the folks in the interwebs are familiar, there are regulations amongst banks owning and being involved in the cryptocurrency market, right? So what did they do? They hired the chief legal counsel from the state regulator out of the state of Washington. They had him change the rules, quit his job, and become the chief legal counsel for the new bank. So once Farmington State Bank was purchased, FTX renamed it Moonstone Bank, which again screams of an occult nature to me.
Yeah.
Moonstone, it's such a strange name for a bank. And no, go ahead, Ron. What do you got?
Well, here's something I would like to know, because we know the whole Silicon Valley Bank FTX connection. right? We did a whole episode on it on Wicked Planet, and we didn't even dig deep into it because I'm in New Hampshire. FTX has an LLC registered in the state of New Hampshire.
Okay.
Because state of New Hampshire is one of the 5 states in the country. It's super easy to get an LLC in, right?
Yep.
So let's go back to this. What is it called? Moonrise Bank now?
Moonstone Bank.
Moonstone Bank. All right, let's go to this bank. Let's go back the last 5 or 10 years.
Yep.
And let's see how many big money loans that they granted to people.
Yep.
That have defaulted.
Way ahead of you.
Yeah.
So I've looked at a lot of those things, and I can tell you the biggest thing that comes out in as a red flag there. So from 2010 to 2020, so the 10 years preceding FTX purchasing the bank and naming it Moonstone, the total number of deposits, according to the FDIC, was, we'll just call it X, right? Not to get too big into the precise numbers. The previous quarter, before the bank was seized in January, the previous 4 months before that, or 3 months, I'm sorry, they had 10X, right? So you have X, the 10 years previous to FTX buying it out, and then 10 times that amount of deposits in one quarter just prior to being seized. So that right there should paint a pretty interesting picture of the volume of money that's going through this bank, right? And on top of that, and I know I listened to your Silicon Valley Bank podcast, Ron. I thought y'all did a good analysis on that stuff. And I think there's a lot of stuff that has not been brought to the surface relative to those stories. And I think this is one of them. And so do you know who funded the lab that is involved in the DNA, genealogical DNA identification of Brian Kohberger from the alleged knife sheath and the alleged touch DNA is actually located out of, I think I previously said it was Austin, Texas. I think it's a suburb of Houston, Texas. It's called Woodsville, Texas. The name of the lab is named Othram Labs. Othram Labs is a Silicon Valley startup funded by Silicon Valley Bank. Yep. Strangely enough.
With FTX money.
Well, actually, that one's not FTX money. But, I mean, the initial funding source comes from the same place, right? So FTX is borrowing money to buy out this Moonstone Bank from Silicon Valley Bank. That's where the financing came from. Now, and I can't recall the guy's name off the top of my head. The Polish fella who helped who was one of the co-founders of PayPal, along with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. This dude's part of the what I call the PayPal mafia. He's the one who funded the Othram Labs through his venture capitalist firm with financing from Silicon Valley Bank. So, the dots land back at Silicon Valley Bank between the Moonstone Bank and the Othram Labs. But again, it draws into question some of the DNA evidence, the hiding of the DNA evidence, et cetera. And again, the moneyed interest behind both of those things is Silicon Valley Bank.
And it's interesting that this little bank up in Washington had that many deposits overnight.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was as soon as FTX and that Deltec Bank, which they formed a partnership out of the Bahamas to purchase that bank. As soon as they came to town, the amount of money going through that bank just skyrocketed. Again, it was like a 10 time multiplier in just one quarter versus the previous 10 years. And again, this is according to the FDIC documents that were, as a result, and other documents relative to the bankruptcy filing on November 11th. So November, again, 36 hours prior to the murders, FTX files bankruptcy. All of this stuff comes public, right? These banking records and stuff as part of their bankruptcy filing. 36 hours later, it sounds like there might have been a cleanup crew operation in and around their money laundering bank in rural Washington, just north of these universities. Yep. I'm just building a circumstantial case of events here, right? And
it makes 100% sense, though. The dot connecting. The dot connecting is working.
And so I kind of made these. And I'm not trying to prop myself up in any regard or anything else, but I'm saying I made a lot of these kind of connections and spoke about them publicly in podcasts dating back in February, right? Othram Labs was not even publicly known until I believe March. This lab that was funded also by Silicon Valley Bank that is the ones who allegedly found this DNA profile, right? Mm-hmm. So it seems to be as time progresses and more information is coming out, it seems to fit the same storyline is what I'm getting at.
Oh,
yep. It's fitting very nicely into the Kohberger did it narrative.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a lot of questions still to be asked in those lines as far as what is going on with these drug trafficking situations in and around those two universities. Where are they laundering the money? if they are laundering money, what else is going on in around that laundering situation out of Moonstone Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, right? And, other players in between. And again, I say other players in between because the owner of that Deltec Bank out of the Bahamas that FTX teamed up with to purchase Moonstone Bank, that guy's an interesting character. He's the creator and producer of the cartoon Inspector Gadget, and he has a lot of strange connections.
Inspector Gadget.
I've been taking notes for part 3.
I like it.
Yeah. All right, guys. What do you think? You want to wrap this?
Yeah, I think that was perfect. Yeah, I think that was perfect.
I think we do. I think I just helped us dive deep enough into the conspiracy theory deep end, so that we can.
I had heard
touch
you
base on more of that in the future, maybe.
Touch on that before, and I was like, I was gonna ask you to get into that as well, because it sounds kind of outlandish or like wild, like conspiratorial, but like, it just. Right. It just seems very fucking sketchy. Like, come on.
I'll admit it does sound conspiratorial. And one thing I do say is one of my earlier influences on conspiracy theory was an individual by the name of Mae Brussel. Are y'all familiar with Mae Brussel?
Nope.
She hosts an AM radio show in like the late '60s through I believe the mid '80s. Before she was a grandma when she started this radio show. So a fairly somewhat elderly Jewish woman. But she was talking about Watergate in like 1971 or something like that, before Watergate was even a term. She was talking about the elements of Watergate, the people involved, the activities involved that would later become known as the Watergate scandal. She was essentially the first one really talking about it. And she would admit that it's the only reason she knew about it because she's connecting dots from these somewhat disparate events that are going on in the media, right? And that in her idea was, if it's going on in the same kind of spatial and geographical framework, so the same time frame, right, as I just built a chronological time frame in the same geographical location, again 30 miles north of these two universities, that if those elements are going on and involves some other factors of the spatial and geographical situations match up, then very likely, as her position was, then those are related incidents. And again, she used that to build this whole Watergate narrative before anyone even knew about Watergate. So all I'm saying is, I didn't come up with kind of the framework of this conspiracy theory. It was actually, I borrowed it from the Mae Brussel School of Conspiracy, but she was definitely onto something then. I think there's something to be said about that protocol.
You know what's interesting when you look back at Watergate now? Now I remember Watergate because I was a kid when that was going on. Like, I remember when Nixon was president, right? Sure. So Watergate, by today's standards, us podcast guys, we would have solved that in like 2 episodes. Compared to what's going on
with the
today,
availability
right?
of information now, yeah. Yeah, right.
But I mean,
we have a lot more information available, sure.
Like if the Watergate thing happened, like, a month or so ago, dude, we'd already had it clocked by now.
Yeah, that would have been old news. That would have been a hot topic that was dead months ago.
Well, let me leave you fellas with one more conspiratorial note in regards to Watergate. So, and the Mormons, as we spoke earlier, because I know Nick and I like talk Mormon stuff.
Yes.
So the individual that was, you're familiar with the Watergate burglars, the individuals who were involved in the Watergate burglars?
Yes, there's a show about that, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think
those guys weren't actually working for the White House. They were contract employees at the White House, but their actual employer was an agency called the Mullen Agency or the McMullen PR Agency, and that was a wholly owned, basically Mormon subsidiary run by a man who was going to be the future senator of Utah, Bob Bennett. And also, I'll drop one more conspiratorial bomb on you. My mother was actually a Mormon in D.C. at that time. And based upon conversations with her and other parties that were in the know at the time, she claims she and Bob Bennett were friends. I think she dated Bob Bennett at that time during Watergate.
Yeah, I had a lot of those just friends too.
Exactly. So the Mormons were deeply involved in Watergate. I mean, and that's oftentimes an overlooked thing. And again, Bob Bennett was running this PR agency that was employing the Watergate burglars as contract employees at the White House. So there was a Mormon intrigue to it that it gets overlooked. And, and we were talking about Mormon intrigues today with the Salt Lake stuff that Ron brought up. And Nick and I are always chatting back and forth on Mormon stuff.
Yeah, I would love to get in on some of those Mormon conversations.
Yeah, that's what I was telling him, man. Yeah, we got to definitely, I would like to get the three of us.
Hey, I'll always talk Mormon stuff,
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both very much, man.
Combo.
Yeah, hell yeah. Ron, you want to let everybody know what your show is, where they can find your stuff? Plug your show again real quick.
Yeah, sure. You can find The Wicked Planet. It's everywhere. It's on Spotify, Apple, Google, We're on iHeartMedia now. We're on Amazon Music and Audible.com.
Nice. Very good.
That's just the big ones.
Yeah.
And you can find them on all the little ones too. You can find me on Instagram at Ron from New England. And we also have the Wicked Planet podcast page on Instagram. Come and give us a follow. And I'm on Twitter at Ron from NE. I'm starting to get a little bit more active over there.
Yeah, I've noticed.
I don't know why, but I don't know. I bounce back and forth between the two. I got a really cool Telegram chat if anybody wants to join that. It's the Wicked Planet podcast chat. Come check it out. And NY, JJ, thank you for having me on again for part 2 of this, and I look forward to part 3.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ron, for jumping on, man. And JJ, thank you so much. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff as well.
Yeah, Nick, I appreciate the invite. I always enjoy our back and forth on messaging and emails, and I absolutely enjoy these conversations. You always have some relevant points to make regarding especially the occult stuff that I'm always intrigued by learning more about. And I think that may be something we could delve into in the future relative to the Pleiades group that started that town in Moscow and some of these maybe possible occult connections with some of the zodiac symbols correlations you identify with gematria and
I'm going to look into
Beg,
that.
perhaps, because again, Moonstone Beg just screams occult to me. But and Ron, I appreciate you joining us. I enjoy speaking to a fellow New Englander. I may not sound like a New Englander, but I was born in Connecticut and I did spend much of my youth growing up in Vermont, so I do very much identify as a New Englander, and I always enjoy meeting fellow New Englanders. I love the eccentric attitude of much of New England and its population. So I think you embody that a lot, and that's one of the things I enjoy.
That we do have apparently.
Oh yeah. No, it's not a derogatory statement anyway. It's one of my favorite things about New Englanders.
Yeah. Hey, I'll tell you what,
I myself am a bit eccentric.
We're hardworking, no nonsense people up here. I mean, we only have 5 months of good weather, and out of that 5, only 3 is really good. So, and then we got 7 months where we're freezing our ass off. So we have a lot of time to be inside research and stuff. And that's why I love this genre so much. I really do. You know what? And I was talking, actually, we were on a group show last night, and I was saying I was getting really bored with a lot of the mainstream conspiracy theories that are going on. And that's why I love diving into this stuff, because this is real life shit. This isn't a conspiracy theory. Like, this really happened. But there's always a conspiracy tied into everything that's going on. I don't care. You can find a conspiracy
human nature
somewhere. And this one has lots of them, and I look forward to digging into them a little deeper. So definitely good to see you guys. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, look forward to next time.
Yeah, can you send me that Telegram chat? I'd like to join your Telegram group for
sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I will.
That Telegram, I'd love to join that. But Operation GCD, I got a link tree on both my Instagram and my Twitter accounts, both at Operation GCD. In fact, you fellas are the ones that have now got me on Instagram. I've never been on Instagram until like a week or two ago. So, I'm still learning the ropes over there. I was having trouble posting stuff at first. I'm like, I got to figure this out. This is somewhat complicated.
Oh, yeah. It took me a bit to learn reels.
Yeah, like I try to post a video. I'm like, you can't post videos here? What is going on here?
It's a little different. It's a little different.
A little slightly different. But I enjoy it. I'm still learning the ropes over there. But I mean, I have a link tree on both sites. I'm not quite on Audible yet, but I remember you mentioned that before, Ron, and I'm pretty much anywhere else podcast can be found.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you both very much. I have all their links in the bottom. I'm pretty sure the Telegram chat's in there already. And, I do have JJ's links in there as well. So go check out all those things. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.